So is everybody okay if I turn my video off? And I only say that because the minute we have our video on, it shows up on the YouTube link, and I prefer the YouTube link that the public only sees the committee. If everyone's okay with that.
That's fine.
Perfect.
You're the best looking person here, though.
Well, that's only because Joe Gallivan's not on the screen. If he had his video on, you know, there'd be some stiff competition, especially for the hair.
On Joe, respond.
I can't say anything. I have to be very, very polite to the clerk, or I get in very big trouble in a hurry.
I can see marbles in your coffee coming.
I beg your pardon, I should advise the committee that I have to leave at noon. I'm on an AMO task force with respect to the conservation authorities, and that meeting starts at 12 noon. So I will have to leave at that time. Just want to let you know. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I'm hoping we won't be much past 11:30.
Thank you.
You are streaming live.
Yeah, let's get out of here then.
Let's go.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of the Procedural Bylaw Committee to order on April 20th, 2022. Jeanette, is there a resolution?
Yes, moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Higgs that the agenda for the April 20th, 2022 meeting of the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee be adopted.
Any opposed? It's carried. Thank you. And are there any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none. General call for an motion for the minutes of the March meeting.
Moved by Councillor McDonald and seconded by Councillor Martin that the minutes of the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee meeting held on March 16th, 2022 be adopted.
Is there any discussion, any questions or comment? All in favor? It is carried. Thank you. Next, we're moving on for discussion. Jeanette, one of the things I guess I wanted to ask is, what is it you hope to get out of this meeting from the members of the committee before we bring this to back to County Council?
So I think through you, Chair Rebel, we're on the last pieces right now. So the review that the proposed changes that I have in front of the committee today are just some simple housekeeping ones for issues that I had come across when I reformatted the bylaws. So they're very quick and simple. And as for that, that would take us through the entire bylaw. And then on top of that, we have the two committee mandates for the committee to review today as well. So if you'll recall at the last meeting, the committee opted to merge the Planning Advisory Committee and the Community Development Advisory Committee into one Planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee. And staff were asked to come back with a proposed mandate. So the mandates for that committee has come forward on the agenda as well. And then there's also a proposed mandate for, if the committee members will recall at the last meeting, they opted to take the Chief Administrative Officer Performance Appraisal Review Task Force Committee and sort of make that into an administration committee, where that committee looked at some other things, including what had been looked at in the past, had been sent to that committee, such as the RFP, looking after the RFP and the interviews for the consultant when they did their strategic, when we were looking for consultants to do council strategic plan, or when we were looking for consultants to carry out the service delivery and organizational review. They've also looked at a few other things as well. So we were asked to bring back forward a mandate for that as well. So those are the items on the agenda today. And then when we're finished, I think the only thing really for members and staff to do is take one good read at the draft procedural bylaw that I have included on the agenda today, just so that the members of the committee can see the new format of the bylaw. I believe I had indicated at the very beginning that the bylaw would be reformatted because the current bylaw is all in tables, which aren't very accessible. So we've reformatted to remove those tables, but the information that was in the bylaw is the same, except for the proposed amendments that the committee opted to make. And then in that last sheet that I have included, which is included on every agenda, are the proposed changes that the committee has made to date. The only difference is I've included a new section on that so that it directs you exactly to where all those changes that you've made. It tells you exactly which section to look for where those changes are located, so that you can see that all those changes that the committee have opted to make have been included in this new bylaw. So basically, we should be able to conclude today, and perhaps one additional meeting where committee members can give the bylaw a really good read, make sure that it includes everything that we talked about, make sure nothing's missing. There could be, again, some little errors in there that you might pick up on, that I picked up on a few just simply by rereading the whole thing. So that's where we are today.
Thank you, Jeanette. So I guess then we'll start out, if you want to maybe share your screen with the items that you wanted to, the housekeeping changes for us. That's what you propose.
Sure. So the first one that we're going to share. So can everybody right now see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so these are, and I do apologize because I've got 3 screens open, so sometimes it's hard for me to find where the mouse is. So these are some of the proposed things that I had picked up on simply when I had read through it. So the first one here is electronic meeting procedures. So when the committee reviewed the electronic meeting procedures, we looked at it in a sense of not being in a declared emergency, and we looked at it in a sense of the committee allowing members of council to participate electronically, that tool was there for you if it was needed. But some of the things that we missed out, there are going to be times when we have electronic meetings where the whole meeting is electronic. Whether it's today, what happened today, where simply we couldn't get there because of illnesses. We have another one coming up, for example, the joint meeting with the townships, which will be a 1-hour meeting with EORN. Those types of meetings will be fully electronic. So what this does is it allows those provisions that were in there in a declared emergency, it brings them back in. So for example, the first one is at the discretion of the clerk, meetings where electronic means are provided may not be physically open to the public to attend. So this is when the public is not in the room with us. If the meeting is not physically open to the public, the clerk shall ensure that members of the public have a reasonable opportunity to hear all proceedings of the meeting through electronic means, except for those parts that are closed. So this ensures that we will continue to put our meetings onto YouTube. It doesn't give council the option. They're going to go up there if the meeting the public is not physically able to attend. So that provision should likely go back in there. The second one here is the warden or chair may, with the consent of the meeting, enact such rules as may be necessary to provide for the conduct of voting in a meeting held in whole or in part through electronic means, including the adoption of motions on unanimous consent, which rules shall supersede the rules of voting set out in section 22. So basically what that is when the meeting is fully electronic. Right now, our rules under section 22 is when you call the vote, it's a show of hands. So this allows the warden the chair to say, well, we're electronic. Some people may not have the greatest video, so their video is off. So he can change the voting method to say, we're going to say all those who don't favor the motion, please speak up. And right now we're doing that at the present time, we're doing that. So for example, we have a number of councillors in the north who sometimes have to turn their video off. A show of hands, they can't do that because the video is not on. So the warden at the time would have said, I'm just going to ask, is anybody opposed to the motion? So it allows the chair to give a little bit of flexibility when the meeting is fully electronic. And then the last one there, despite section 20.11, and the reason I have these highlighted is because once the committee approves this, I will need to to change those sections to match up with what's in the bylaw. So that highlighting is just there for my administrative purposes. But the last one there is, despite section 20.11, all motions will be read during meetings held under section 6.19. So again, when the meeting is fully electronic, the public are not able to be in the room, and the only thing they're seeing is a YouTube screen. We continue to read the motions because the motions are not put up on the screen as they typically would be in our previous council meetings, where council was meeting in the auditorium. We had a screen behind us. The agenda was posted up there. Everybody could see what was happening. Everybody could see the motion. So again, this would just simply take us to when we're in a full electronic meeting. So to ensure that transparency piece, that the motions are read. So that was just the first one.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any comments from any members of the committee? Seeing none. Jeanette, are we just going to, we're doing separate motions on any of these, or just by consent of the committee moving forward?
No, just by consent. So I'm just writing down when the committee agrees, I just hit the agreed, and then I just put it into the bylaw. So the final motion, the only motion that you will actually need to pass is that we approve the procedural bylaw as presented.
Good. Then there are no further questions from this committee, then we'll just move on from there. Jeanette, thank you.
Okay, so the next one there is roles and duties. So I haven't changed it. I've just moved it up into the bylaw. So it's basically moved up closer to the beginning of the bylaw, and it follows the membership of the council and then the warden and deputy warden. It just makes more sense to have the administrative stuff all at the beginning. So it moves it just up the bylaw as opposed to being at the very end.
Okay. Again, since we're sharing the screen, I can't see members. So if you have a question, please just speak up, and we'll go from there. If I don't hear from anyone, we'll just continue to move on. Jeanette, thank you.
Okay, and then the other one is the roles and duties. So I've just added the duties of the warden and deputy warden, and simply because they were missed the last time. We had their roles, their duties were identified in the previous bylaw, so there's no wording changing at all. It's just, it gets a heading, duties of the warden and deputy warden, because that was in the previous bylaw. And then the next one is a new section 7, conduct at meetings. So at the last meeting, the committee did approve what was laid out for conduct at meetings. I'm only suggesting that it gets its own section. So it just has a section heading, conduct at meetings. So again, the content hasn't changed. It's what was approved at the committee meeting last week. It's just getting a separate heading.
Thank you.
And then the last one here does not permit an alternate to do council liaison meetings. So basically under our alternates, when going through the bylaw again, we had definitions of alternates and what they could and couldn't do. So it indicated that the alternate can come to council and take the place of the member who's not able to attend, but that alternates didn't have the ability to sit on advisory committees, or that alternates didn't have the ability to act as the liaison. So for example, Councillor McDonald is the liaison for corporate services. If he's going away for a month, he sends an alternate to council. That alternate doesn't have the opportunity to act as the liaison and meet with staff. So again, the committee at the last meeting opted to remove those liaison positions. So this is just simply a reference that if council agrees with that route, that we're going to eliminate the liaison positions, we're just going to eliminate that section out of the bylaw, that reference out there.
Thank you.
And then the last one here, the clerk will read any notices. So this is what was actually in the original bylaw. It said the clerk will read any notices of motion at the designated point on the agenda. However, they will form part of the agenda for the subsequent meeting of council. So that's not actually notices of motion which has been given. That's actually the giving of notices of motion. So again, it's just getting its own little title to reference that this is actually giving notices of motion, and you would find that in section 18.34 of the new bylaw. Again, it's still in the old bylaw. It's just clarification that when the clerk actually reads that at a meeting and it goes on the next agenda, that's actually a giving notice of motion. Because when
Right.
councillors give a notice of motion to the clerk before the agenda gets published, it goes right on the agenda and it's dealt with at that meeting. So again, just a little bit of clarification.
That, through you, Mr. Chair, is that's really a notification that you're going to bring a motion forward. It's not actually the motion itself.
Yes, well, and that's councillors' option. Sometimes councillors will come right to the meeting and say, I have this motion, it's going on the next one. Some may just say, I'm going to give a notice of motion to the next meeting. I write down what that is. You know, it could be, so for example, Councillor McDonald will be bringing forward a motion at the next meeting regarding the procedural bylaw.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So those were just some housekeeping items that I had happened to come across when I was pulling the stuff from the old bylaw, reformatting it into its new format. So that's all that those were, just housekeeping. There's really no changes here. There's just headings added. The only significant change is this procedure for electronic meetings when the public is not able to be in the room with council, similar to the situation that we're going through right now. So
Thank you. I was going to say, if there are no further questions from members of the committee, then Jeanette, I think you can assume consent from the members and incorporate those changes into the bylaw.
perfect.
Thank you. And moving on then to the next part of the discussion.
So the next one in respect of Mr. Gallivan's time, because he does have to leave, I think the first one we can go through is I will pull up the mandate for the proposed planning advisory, so planning and economic development advisory committee. So if you can just give me 1 second here. And I will share my screen. Okay, so this basically is a merged version of the previous planning and economic planning advisory committee and then the the community development advisory committee. So they've both been merged together. The membership, we have some question marks here because that still needs to be a committee decision in terms of how many members of the public you want on there, how many members of council you want on there. If you will recall, the previous planning advisory committee had the 4 mayors and three representatives from the public. And I believe, again, that the committee at the last meeting opted to not restrict this to simply the mayors. So we are advising from a perspective of staff that we do continue to have 4 members of council, but that there is representation from each township. So it's not necessarily the 4 mayors, but it is 1 member from each member municipality. But it would be up to the committee to decide how many members of the public they would want in that. Again, these are pretty similar in nature. They show where they fall in the schedule of the bylaw. They show that they have to follow the procedural bylaw. We will insert the new number of the procedural bylaw here. So the terms of reference are found here. And again, these are simply merged. So I'm not sure if you wanted to go through each point by each point. Again, the committee needs to look at what you want advisory committees to do for you. So you're all members of council. You have the ultimate decision of council. But what exactly is it that you're looking for from advisory committees to help you make decisions as a council? So in terms of that, does the mandate fit what you were speaking of? And I'm not sure if Mr. Gallivan has anything further to add in terms of what staff necessarily are looking for from advisory committees before things come to council. Currently, right now, we have under planning that the committee is responsible directly to council. That's with any committee. Subsequent to the approval of the budget, consider budget proposals and business plans for the Planning and Economic Development Department pertaining to items within the committee's mandate. So again, within this committee's mandate, for example, with planning, the mandate of this committee would only be for county planning matters, which are plans of condominium, plans of subdivision, and Mr. Galvin can help me out here, but I think it also includes approval of township official plans, but planning applications that are at the township level that we do as a contracted service would not come to this planning advisory committee.
Perhaps if I may, in the interests of hearing from Joe, maybe with consent of the committee, we'd ask Joe to offer any comments that he might have at this stage, and if there's any discussion from members of the committee on his comments, then we could deal with that and allow him the opportunity to leave as he needs to for next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Ravel. Just a couple of comments on what you have in front of you. First of all, a reminder that the reason that the Planning Advisory Committee was first established is because it was required through changes to the Planning Act. So we must have a Planning Advisory Committee. I worked with Ms. Amini on putting this draft terms of reference together for you. It still meets the requirements of the Planning Act in terms of this committee will be making recommendations to council on the plans of subdivision as the county continues to be the approval authority. As Jeanette also mentioned, any official plan amendment from the 4 townships or a new official plan from the 4 townships, which requires the approval of county council, will go through this committee. Again, I think one of the benefits of having a combined economic and planning committee is that there has been gaps in the Planning Advisory Committee meeting, and we felt that by combining them, there'd be a more comprehensive agenda, that there would be a better connectivity for the decision makers on what both sides of our department are doing and how we're working together. We've specifically left out for your decision making on the structure of the committee, with the exception of it is the recommendation of staff that in terms of county council members, that there be a member from each of the 4 townships rather than one of the townships being left out. I think it's fairly important, especially for citizens who the committee would be in front of for various planning matters where the county is the approval authority, that they know that they have a local councillor who's at the table listening to their concerns. This committee, I've seen other similar committees in Eastern Ontario. The mandate is, in my mind, there's a committee in Renfrew County that has a very similar mandate. They meet on a monthly basis. There are no members of the public, but I think that where the county has gone with the Community Development Advisory Committee, and again, it's your decision, but there's been some interest and value in having citizens at the table to make these decisions. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll take any questions or anything else that you want to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you. Noah. Are there comments from members of the committee?
Yeah, Jerry, I have a comment.
Go ahead, please, Jerry.
It's for Joe. My comment is, Joe, when we have well, an example, I guess, would be like a zoning change from res to commercial, and that's approved by our local committee of adjustment. Now, it'd be an official change. Does that still have to come forward to this planning advisory committee at the county level?
No, through you, Councillor Ravel. No, those are local planning decisions. So any local decision of any committee of adjustment is not coming to this committee. Any rezoning, site plan approval, none of that is dealt with at our county committee, because county council is not the approval authority. It's only those applications where ultimately county council has to make a decision. So plans of subdivision, plan of condominium, an amendment to any local official plan, or a brand new official plan, like recently the Central Frontenac official plan that was adopted by Township Council came through the Planning Advisory Committee first before it went to Council. So the local planning issues stay with Township Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelvin. I guess one thought I have in terms of the composition of the committee, since we are in fact, where its intent certainly would be to offer some guidance or reflection on economic development, that we look at some of our membership that might have some, might reflect some of the local business community as part of the composition of the committee. And I would think it, again, as we would for county councillors, having one from each district, I think it would be appropriate to also look at some diversity in the membership of the citizen appointees from across the county area, and whether that means 4 or possibly as many as 6 citizen appointees, I guess would be an area that I would probably favor or at least consider as being valid to moving forward. I'm happy to hear comments from other members.
Mr. Chair, Bill here, or to Joe. I'm getting the impression that you're in favor of combining these two organizations, if you find that you'd actually end up able to work better together. Am I right in that assumption?
Through you, Councillor Ravel. We've talked about it. Richard Allen and I have talked about it. You know, I'm fortunate I get to sit in both committee meetings. I think there's just, because we're doing regional work, I won't call it county work, I'll call it regional work on both sides. And there's some overlapping of how regional planning policy affects economic development. We felt that it would be better that there's one committee listening to that conversation rather than 2 separate committees.
Right. I agree with that. Through you, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we move forward with this and make a recommendation back to council as a whole when we turn in the procedural bylaw, and that we make a recommendation that the membership on this be the 4 mayors to represent all of the areas, plus a public representative from each of the 4 areas, so that you'd have a grand total of 8 people involved in these committee meetings. That would be my recommendation to the committee as a whole.
Just if I may, thank you. If I may respond, Councillor, you mentioned the 4 mayors, and we've, through our procedural bylaw process, we've essentially made the thought that we would not necessarily include mayors as being the only option for representation from each municipality. It could be the alternate member could serve as well instead of a mayor. If you wish that to be carried forward your comment, that's something I'd like to hear from other members as well.
I wouldn't necessarily, I would agree with that, is that it could be a representative, another representative of the county council, but I think what I was aiming at was trying to get equal representation from the county plus the public.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. That would suit me, as long as we have enough representation from outside. I think currently we have quite a strong presentation from people that are in business or have specific interest in economic development that are supporting the CDAC committee now, and I would be reluctant to miss some of those reflections from across our community. So I'm thinking minimum of 4, possibly a couple more.
Mr. Chair, in the throes of moving forward, I would make the recommendation and then let the discussion happen at the county level as to whether or not that number is one that we can work with.
I'm fine with that. Thank you, Councillor.
So
Any
if I
other?
could, sorry,
Go ahead.
Chair, I have a quick question just from listening to the discussion. The 4 community members, will that just be 4 community members at large, or were you looking for 4 community members from the business sector? I was just hearing that in previous discussion that you wanted businesses represented. So do you want to put criteria around those 4 public members, or do you want to just leave it open? Because typically what we do is we would put out nominations in the fall to sit on our advisory committees at the term of a new council, because they're usually for a 4-year term. So we would put that out, and we typically would put who might be interested in this. So are we going to leave it carte blanche for anybody to be able to apply to sit on this committee, or are you looking for some technical representation here?
I'm not sure that it, in terms of how much technical representation, but currently I think we have certainly a strong majority of the citizen appointees to the CDAC committee do have some very relevant and direct experience in the local business sector or in other matters in terms of economic development. So I think there's some, I would have some bias to consider including those, and it may be in the call for nominations that we ask for that as being one of the characteristics that we would consider to have value to the committee. Whether it's an exclusive or you must have, I think is not necessarily so, but that it would have some bias towards that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may interrupt, I think what we have to do is also recognize the changing of our population. We've had a tremendous influx of new citizens in the area. All it is just go back to the building content that's happening here. So by throwing it open a little bit to the public, in actual fact, you may actually get somebody who would be a great asset to the township that's coming from another area that has a tremendous amount of experience of which we might be able to build on or at least take advantage of. So having it open, you may in actual fact get some excellent candidates that might want to fill one of these roles. It's just another point to be considered.
Thank you. I think ultimately your overarching comment is that we should be going back to other members of county council, or as we bring forward these reports, we'll have the overall discussion from all of county council, and there may be
absolutely
thoughts that are brought forward at that time. So I'm comfortable with that as a concept.
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect. So this mandate would stay as presented, but we're just going to make that for community representatives. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. So the next one, just give me 1 minute to open it for a second. And I will share my screen. So this is the next one, which is the administration committee. And again, it reflects basically the first piece is the membership. So the previous CAO performance appraisal review committee had the 4 mayors. Again, this committee felt that it should be open to everybody. But what we have done here is we are suggesting that 2 of those members at least be the warden and deputy warden. And the reason that we are putting this forward simply is because this committee will be responsible for carrying out the performance appraisal of the CAO. And the warden and deputy warden are the ones who work most closely with the CAO and are going to be the ones most able to provide adequate feedback in terms of that review. So we've sort of recommended that at least the warden and deputy warden be on that, and that of course would change every year because the deputy warden and warden would change every year. And then we're also recommending 2 members of county council for the remaining 2 members of the 2 other member municipalities. So the committee will recall that they've opted to have the position of warden and deputy warden open for everybody, but they did make the recommendation that the warden and deputy warden not be from the same municipality. So if you have a warden from South and a deputy warden from Central, then the other 2 members would have to be from North and Islands. So this committee's actual composition or appointment would change every year. It wouldn't be a 4-year term. We would have to change this every year. But that is what staff have recommended in terms of its composition. The terms of the mandate, this is directly from the CAO Performance Appraisal Review Committee mandate. We are opting to keep it in there because there are some specific things, especially in terms of accountability and transparency, from the Justice Morocco report that was done a year or so ago, in terms of how the CAO reports any conflicts of interest. So we did feel it important to keep that in there specifically for that. But here are some of the things that the administration committee might also be responsible for. So I perhaps don't have this worded correctly, but one is the service delivery review. So for example, you want to put out an RFP for a consultant to carry out a service delivery review. The committee would look after that RFP process. The committee would look after interviewing the submissions of the RFPs. Whether you want them to carry out the full service delivery review. And again, sometimes when you carry out key projects in a smaller place, is more provides for better comments. The next one is the strategic policies and strategic priorities. So council, at each term of council passes its strategic plan. And so, for example, if you're coming up with policies around that strategic plan, do you want to send it to this committee? Again, if you're carrying out an RFP for a consultant to carry out the strategic plan, do you want to send it to this committee to do that as well? It could also be responsible for looking at the organizational structure of the municipality. It could look at compensation review for members of council. So rather than sending that to the full council, because some of these items take a little bit more discussion than what is really allowed for on the council floor. So is this committee something that might look at the council compensation review? The committee could also look at our comparator municipalities. There's been comments in the past of who are our comparator municipalities. Are they still relevant? So this is something that committee could look at as well. And I'm also suggesting that it receive and make the nominations to council on advisory committees. So rather than when we do nominations to advisory committees, and usually there's quite a few at the initial term of council, because that's when they're all submitting their applications. So for one committee, we could get 10 applications with only 4 openings. So in order to allow perhaps greater in-depth discussion on who you want to sit on these committees, do you want to use this committee as a nominations committee? Now, again, any nominations that they would put on committees would still need to go to council, but it just allows for a more in-depth conversation than what actually can take place on the council floor. So those were just some of the thoughts that I had, whether or not the committee agrees with that, or if there's anything they might want to add, or additional criteria around any of those things. But these are things, again, that have been sent to the CAO Performance Appraisal Committee in the past, and some other things that the committee might want to consider.
Comments from the committee? So Jeanette, I had a couple of comments. First of all, so we've moved the slide. This committee is still an advisory committee, I presume.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. I know in terms of the wording, there certainly will be opportunities where there will be essentially a 2-year term for the deputy warden, likely, as they ascend to the warden's chair on the committee. And it's conceivable that the warden serving in the first year could become the deputy warden in the 4th year. So it won't necessarily be a wholesale change in every year. Everyone will change.
That's correct. So everybody may not change, but the warden and the deputy warden would definitely change. But the 2 members from the remaining 2 member municipalities, those would likely be up for nominations each year.
Well, my point being, presumably the deputy warden from Central Frontenac will become the warden in the following year. Typically how it...
Yes, so the warden and the deputy warden are what's the word? They're permanent positions. on this committee. So the warden
Yes.
and deputy warden are not nominated every year to sit on this committee. Who's ever elected warden or elected deputy warden is automatically on this committee, similar to
Fair
RULAC.
enough.
Similar to RULAC. The nominations that would take place each year are for the other 2 member councils from the remaining 2 member municipalities. So
Thank you.
those are the 2 nominations that would happen each year.
Thank you. Other comments from members of the committee? I think people are comfortable with that, Madam Clerk. We'd like to move on, I think.
Okay, so I'll just stop sharing this. So that was basically all of the only changes that needed to be made today in terms of the committee. Now I can share my screen and show you just the one last thing that's up there. I'll just share my screen. Give me 1 second here. So this is contained on your agenda each month, and this is the basically the amendments that you have made to date. So it includes everything from your first meeting in October all the way down to your last meeting last month. But what has been added is this new column here, which is location in the new bylaw. So you can just basically look at this and see. So this was one of the changes that you opted to make. And I can now find it in section 2 of the bylaw, specifically section 2.3. So it just gives you some assurance that the amendments that you made, that you opted to make as a committee, have been included in the new bylaw, because it shows you exactly where to find them. So this is really just for your information purposes, but I did want to give you that opportunity to see all of the changes that you have made to the bylaw to date and exactly where you find them in the new bylaw. So, and then I'm going to just quickly stop sharing my screen for this. And I'm going to show you the proposed new bylaw. I just have to find it first. I'm sorry, I have so many things open here. Give me 1 second. So if everybody can see this screen, this is basically what your new procedural bylaw looks like. So this first page is just really a cover page. It will show the date that it's passed. And this consolidated just shows that each time there's an amendment made to the procedural bylaw, the whole procedural bylaw would get consolidated, which is basically the procedural bylaw with all of its amendments. So that would just be the date of the last consolidation. This page, again, doesn't technically form part of the bylaw. It's just an information page on each amendment that will be made to the bylaw in the future. So this one now has a new index. We will get the page numbering into it, but it just basically gives you all the sections. So you have short title, interpretations, applications, all of the sections are there. And so this is how the bylaw will read. So again, here are all your sections. It's fully accessible. It's been put into an accessible format. And if I can show you how that would look in an accessible format. So this is what your accessible format looks like. So it allows the user to skip to individual sections. So if you were looking specifically for roles and responsibilities, you can just click on this and the bylaw takes you right down to it. If you're looking specifically for the role of the warden, again, you can click on this and it will take you right down to it. So it's fully accessible. The tables were not accessible. So it's basically the same information, but has been pulled out of the tables and into a document such as this using headings and subheadings and paragraphs. So that's what the new bylaw looks like. It includes, as I mentioned, all of the recommendations that the committee has made to date. And again, that previous sheet that I showed will show you exactly where you can find the amendments that you've made to date. And that is roughly all that was the last remaining pieces of the bylaw. So the only work left to do now is I will incorporate the changes that were made today into the new bylaw, give it one good final read over to make sure all the spelling errors or any grammatical errors or anything's not missed. And then at your meeting next week, I will have a full report with the bylaw, including all the amendments that have been made. And the recommendation from that report will be that this committee recommend that the Council of the County of Frontenac hold a special committee of the whole meeting to receive and review the procedural bylaw.
Right.
Any
So-
questions from members of the committee?
I would assume the final draft of this bylaw, through you, Mr. Chair, to Jeanette, will only happen after the county as a whole has actually taken a quick look at it to see whether or not they concur with some of the recommendations we've made. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. That will be the purpose of the committee of the whole meeting. So typically our advisory committees such as this, when you receive reports from staff, we go through the report and then the recommendation from the committee is put on the council agenda. But because of the complexity of this, because of its council's bylaw, we want for all of them to have a good read and to really understand the work that this committee has done and the recommendations that you've made. We're preferring a committee of the whole meeting because I really would like council to take a good hour at least, if not longer, to really go through this and make sure that they understand everything that's in it, that they see what the committee has done, some of the recommendations that the committee has made. So that will be the next step. And then if at committee of the whole, they may very well send it back to this committee for further thought. We don't know what would happen there. They may accept some of the recommendations, they may not.
Jeanette, you made the comment that when we meet next week, we're going to...
Or next month.
Okay. I think I would certainly appreciate the opportunity once the minor changes have been incorporated to do a final read through myself. And if we're looking at another meeting of this committee, perhaps it's something that if there are only very minor comments from individual members of the committee, whether they're typos or simple questions, if they can be resolved without meeting, or if it's a very brief meeting after county council, then we could deal with it that way. But otherwise, I think we probably would be in a position to bring it forward to county council at our the committee of the whole meeting, unless there are significant changes that members feel out of having read the final document. I'd like a bit of time to review it in its entirety. And
for sure. So perhaps what I can suggest is I can give it, incorporate today's amendments, slight amendments that were made, incorporate the two committee mandates that were proposed today, and then give it a good read. And hopefully by next week, I can poll council to say that we would like to hold a committee of the whole meeting and get the best possible dates for that meeting, and ensure that all of them have the information, because there's no report. There would be just simply a report presenting the information. There's no reason why I couldn't have that information to county council at least a few weeks in advance of that meeting, so that everybody has the opportunity to give it a good read before the meeting, especially those members of council that have not been involved with this committee. If that works for everybody. So then we certainly wouldn't need to have a meeting after the next council meeting, if everybody's okay with what's being presented.
I think that's a good plan. I think we're very, very close to having a very complete document, so I'm comfortable with that.
Perfect.
I'm also.
Great.
And I honestly would like to really thank you guys for going through this journey with me on a procedural bylaw review committee. We are the guinea pigs of a lot of my clerk friends out there or counterparts out there. Typically, this is done at a staff level and then brought to a council, but it's your procedural bylaw. It has to work for you. So I'm really glad that we went this committee route. And I've had a lot of questions from my clerks as to how it's going, and I would highly recommend it in the future. You guys have done a great job and given us some great support here as staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. I think it's been very productive from my perspective, at least, to have a much better understanding of the procedural bylaw. And I've been glad to have had that opportunity to participate in this along with the other members, the valued advice they brought forward to the committee as well. So thank you and very much appreciated.
Now, I do have a question. Do you have a better understanding now of the procedural bylaw than what you did when you first came onto council? Because a lot of the discussion as well in some of the election orientation sessions that I have been attending through the clerks as well is that there really needs to be a full orientation on the procedural bylaw, especially now where you have risks of getting called by an integrity commissioner, risks of, having closed meetings, risks of doing all sorts of things, that there's a key focus on ensuring that council is very familiar with its procedural bylaw, and that part of the orientation should really take all of council through an orientation on the procedural bylaw, on how a council meeting works, and the roles and responsibilities of you as members of council. So do you have a better understanding after going through this process than what you did before?
Can I make a comment?
Certainly, go ahead.
Well, my comment is that I really think it would have been a day well spent at the beginning of this term of council. I learned a lot through this process that Jeanette has put us through for the last few months. And I really think if I had sat down for a day at the beginning of this term of council, I would have been a lot more informed counselor. So I think it's time.
Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for me being the kind of the junior counselor here, that it was a real learning experience for me. I mean, a lot of rules that I didn't even know about or anticipate, and so it's been an education for me. And so I just thank you for that.
Bill.
Yes, Jeanette, Mr. Chair, is that any process like this, there's always new additions and new rules and regulations that come through. So going through the process, even though you've been around a table a long time, it does give you an opportunity to learn new points that you may not have thought about before. But before I leave this, I just want to say thank you to Jeanette and to Kelly for your guidance through this process, because without your guidance, I think we would have probably been spinning our wheels on some of these issues. So that's very much appreciated from my seat at the table, that we've actually come up with a product here, I think, that will serve the county going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Bill. And I just want to add as well that, I think we are aware of a procedural bylaw, and it comes as referenced from time to time in our council meetings. But until you actually have this opportunity to go over it in some depth and to really think about the provisions of the bylaw, it really doesn't come to life as much as it has through this exercise. And so I think it's been certainly an eye-opener for me and very educational. And to echo Bill's comments, your guidance and experience have been extremely helpful in the evolution of the new bylaw. It's been extremely helpful, Jeanette, and Kelly's oversight as well. So thank you so much. And I think that pretty much concludes our discussion for this morning. Unless there's anything more, I think we probably should be calling for a motion for adjournment.
Yes, so that's moved by Councillor Higgs and seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the meeting hereby adjourn at 12:09 p.m.
Is there anyone opposed to that resolution?
I'm too hungry to oppose.
No, but
It's carried.
I can tell you should read your emails the night before because I drove into Kingston this morning.
Bye, everybody. Have a good day.